How's everyone doing with Lab 0 so far? Has anyone not started Lab 0 yet? Can't find out how to start it. So what I do is I attach them under assessments, and then it's an attached file. Here, I'll do it in student view. Actually, that would probably make more sense, because you guys don't have the same interface that I do. So just over here, if you go under assignments, there's an attachment, Lab 0 F20, and that's where it is. For whatever reason, Brightspace doesn't let you put it under content and under assessments without making two independent folders. And that makes it really complicated when you do time release stuff the way we're doing. Anyone else have any questions about Lab 0? That's awesome, Chad. Good for you. I know a guy who used to do war driving. Are you familiar with that term? It's when you you have a pen testing laptop in your vehicle, and you just drive around the neighborhood until you find free Wi-Fi, then download whatever it is you're looking for, and then like if say you want to make a big download and you have a bandwidth cap, you just go find some other Wi-Fi to do it. And apparently back in the early 2000s, that was very common to do. Will there be a schedule for when TAs are available for questions? So the TAs and I have all agreed that a schedule in a pandemic is not going to work for most people. So the TAs actually have very flexible schedules that are scheduled at your convenience. So just message the TA that you want to talk to, and they will find a time that works for you. But they are very willing to be available to you evenings and weekends. Two of them have full-time jobs in the daytime, so evenings and weekends are better for them, but two of them do not. So there's always full coverage, and I'm pretty much always available too. Now it's only been a week, but how are you feeling about teaching the class like this online? I taught this course in the winter when we transitioned rapidly from in class to online. So starting online is much less stressful, but my firm opinion is if I can't adapt to teaching this course online, I shouldn't be teaching web-centric computing. How are you guys finding the class so far in an online format? How does it compare to your other classes? Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Emerson. Right on. All right, guys, so it looks like we're just about on time to get started. So a couple of things before I start with today's lecture. Some students pointed out that they couldn't find Lab 0 on Brightspace. I attach all of the deliverables to the submission folder. That way everything's in the same place. For some reason, we sort of have a culture at Dell of not doing that, and it sometimes gets hard to find things. It's just easier for us when we're programming time release things to do it through the submission folder. If anyone still can't find it after that, let me know, because there's probably something wrong with your access credentials at that point. Second of all, I'm sure you all saw I posted an announcement last night saying the first round of Lab 0 feedback has come in. Most of you have been doing quite well. The only reasons I've had to reject them so far is because people are submitting PNGs or zip files. Well, I know it's annoying to get your submission rejected because of that. It's too hard for us to process those file types just the way the Brightspace interface is. So we need you to resubmit as a PDF. There's absolutely no penalty other than the time it takes to create the PDF. Only about 20 of you have submitted it so far, which is still much better than the way we were last night. Without Lab 0 being finished, 90% of the course will not appear on Brightspace. And it's actually not worth anything to your mark. It's just a key to getting started so we know that you're in the right place. If you don't have it done by Friday at midnight, I'm not going to nag you. You can do it whenever you want to, but I would be concerned that you're setting yourself up in a bad spot, because then you can't even look at what labs you want to do and what labs you don't want to do and create priority. So having said that, let me show you what I did last night, which is programming Brightspace, which will release on September 18th. This is our tentative lab schedule. It's still subject to change, so if you screenshot it and it's changed, I reserve the right to make those changes. But you'll see it's not a short list of labs. So we've got Lab 1 on frameworks, Lab 2 on storyboarding, 3 on documentation for pen testing, 4 on GitLab, 5 on preserving state, 6 you're building a web crawler, 7 you're understanding user behavior from server logs, Lab 8 you're doing pen testing. It actually ended up being too big of a lab to be one lab, so we made it 2 over with 11. Then we look at web accessibility, socket programming, and at the end of the term, I'm gonna have you build a chat server. So if you don't have Lab 0 done, you won't even be able to look at this on Brightspace. Because we want you to have all the tools you need to start the lab, because there's nothing worse than when you get to week 7 or week 8 and you're behind and you can't even start the lab because you don't have your virtual machine, you don't have your Git, whatever it is. So we want those problems out of the way now. Okay, cool. Does anyone have any questions on that? I'm watching the chat, give me 10 seconds. No? Okay, next question. I'm getting mixed, I keep changing my mind on what I want to do, so I'm gonna ask the room. When I record the lectures later, do you want me to keep the chat in the window so you can see what's going on? I know whenever I watch live streams, I get kind of annoyed when I can't see the chat, but it will take up screen real estate. Do you guys want the chat in the video, or do you want me to keep it off to the side? Chat makes sense. Keep the chat. Agreed? Okay, cool. So today's lecture is on usable security. Okay, cool. So it doesn't matter. Oh no, I'm tongue-tied. Today's lecture is on usable security. So one of the things that I told you guys in the beginning of this course is that this is a 3-prong approach to teaching it. So today we're going to be moving these two of these prongs together. Is this on YouTube? If I put it on YouTube, the only concern I would have with putting it on YouTube is if your names are in the chat, there could be privacy concerns. later on, we'll have a discussion about whether or not we want to do that. Because I'm perfectly willing to put my stuff up. I just don't want to put someone's privacy at risk, because I'm a big believer in privacy. Anyway, we'll talk about that after. So today we're going to be looking at the intersection of user interface design and security, two things that typically conflict with each other. In fact, Dr. Hockey says that they're the reciprocal of each other. So these slides all come from Dr. Hockey's graduate course and fourth year course on usable security and privacy. I've taken an entire semester's worth of slides and slimmed them down into what I think is important. And if you are interested in this slide deck in particular, I highly, highly recommend checking out her course. It is one of the better courses I've taken. Okay, so first off, this is one of my favorite XKCDs. The crypto nerd's imagination. His laptop's encrypted. Let's build $1 million cluster to crack it. No good, it's 4096-bit RSA, blaster, evil playing swirl. That's kind of what we all like to think would happen, but what actually happened? His laptop's encrypted. Drug him and hit him with this $5 wrench until he tells us the password. That's the thing. The encryption ciphers that we use are coercion resistant mathematically, but it doesn't mean the human is going to be just as resistant. So if you ever come to me and say, what's the easiest way to hack this or pen test this or whatever, my answer will always be attack the human. Our tests always show that we can make our encryption stronger, we can add more processing power, we can add more ciphers, we can add more anything of that. But the one thing we can't do is make the human more competent, especially if there's many human targets. All right, here we are with the Dilbert. Dogbert's password recovery service for morons. I don't remember my password. Is it 123? It's just spooky. Dogbert's password recovery service for morons. I done forgot my password. What's your name? My name is Ned, I think. Is Ned your password? Sweet baby jeepers, you're like some sort of Nostradamus. Here's a brochure from my phone. So basically, we're only as secure as the human can make us be. So for example, I used to work for defense, and one of the things we used to do constantly was go around, like whenever there's a position at defense called ISSO, which is Information Security Services Officer. And whenever those guys are bored and they just feel like getting up and walking around, they just go to the basement and start walking through the cubicles and slowly make their way up to the top floor. And they hand out these little sticky notes that say, we noticed you had a password on your computer, like on a sticky note, or we noticed you left your computer unattended and logged in. And then they write down whoever did this, and this counts as work. And one of the things we always found was no matter how complicated we made password complexity requirements, like you can't reuse this password, you can't do this, you can't do this, we always found people were just putting sticky notes that would say things like, my password is password. Even in one case, someone called me to reset their password and it wasn't working. And I said, well, what do you mean? Like, you're typing in a password? And she goes, yeah, I'm trying to type in green123, but it won't let me do it. And I was like, well, now that you've told me the password, you can't use that. And I go, but that still meets the requirements. And she goes, yeah, my old password was like green1. Is that different enough? I'm like, no, it's not. So sometimes we start to think about these password complexity requirements as actually being hinders to the human security that don't necessarily make improvements to the computer's ability to block you out. The only thing really, in my opinion, that it does, like a password policy requirement does, is it makes sure if ever there's a data breach, the data has to be up to date. So like if you breach Scotiabank's admin passwords or whatever, and there's a list floating around the dark web, you know within 6 months of the date of that breach, that data set no longer has any value. And that's kind of the big trade-off, is they go, well, we can keep the data safe, but then you end up with people putting sticky notes on their computer saying their password is green123. Another Dilbert, now what? Create a password that's at least 6 characters long with a mix of letters and numbers. How about 123? No. It has to include letters and be at least 6 characters long. How about ABC? Letters and numbers 6 characters long. And then he types in for some, just isn't getting it. So again, we go back to passwords, people want to use the password they want to use, and going against that is actually kind of harmful. So I remember one time when I started my master's, I went to get a loan at BMO, and I've never done any business with BMO in my life. I had no accounts with them, no nothing, but my dad has all of his stuff with there and he was co-signing. So I was learning my way around BMO and they were making me an account so I could log in. And the password I was using, they were telling me it's too complex. And I was like, what do you mean it's too complex? It's, in my opinion, actually pretty lame password. She was like, no, it has to be all lowercase and be exactly 6 characters. And I looked at her dead in the eye and said, one of these days you're going to get hacked and I'm going to laugh so hard. And 2 days later, they got hacked and I was like really nervous to go back there because I thought they would think it was me that did it. We want to go for the passwords we want to go for. So whenever I have to change my password style, because typically speaking, I use passphrases. So instead of doing the classic of uppercase letter, some word, numbers with a symbol, I just remember a specific phrase and associate it with the site. Then I have grammatical rules about how it's formatted so I don't ever make a mistake. And my thinking is that spaces actually count as a symbol. So that ends up making a nice long complex password with symbols, letters, lowercase and uppercase. And some sites don't allow spaces, and that always really annoys me. Or some sites don't allow symbols. And then I have to go and think of a new password, which I actually think reduces the security because now I either have to write it down or use a password manager, or I'm gonna have to do a forget the password more than once, that kind of thing. All right, I am Morduck. Morduck is my favorite character in Dilbert, by the way. He is the preventer of information services. I bring new guidelines for passwords. All passwords must be at least 6 characters long, include number and letters, include a mix of uppercase and lowercase. Use different passwords for each system, change once a month, and we don't write anything down. So like I was just talking about. How safe are password managers? Great question. So let's talk about that. We'll take a moment to talk about that. So typically speaking, the password manager, the biggest critique people have is it's putting all your eggs in one basket. So if the password manager were to be breached, which is possible, particularly if someone has a keylogger installed directly on your computer. If someone has a keylogger on your computer, it's game over. There's just anything you type before noticing that keylogger is gone to whoever. And if that's the case, your master password, so those of you who don't know, a password manager is a program that stores all your passwords and you use a master password to access it. It creates complex passwords for every site, and it's got like browser plugins to plug in those passwords so you only ever have to remember your one password. And the idea is that you won't have any repeat passwords out there and they'll still be strong and complex and you only have to remember one. So if there's a keylogger on your computer or some other way that password manager is breached, that is a singular point of failure. But that is not likely the place that's going to be breached. Typically speaking, if you want to get a password, I'll show you. So there's a website called Have I Been Pwned? And in this site, you can type in your email address or a password you use commonly, and it will tell you if it appears in any major data set. This site is very well respected in the cybersecurity community. I don't know the guy who maintains it personally, but Kirsty Hockey is actually on pretty good terms with him, and she's met him at conferences a bunch of times, and he's always keeping the site up. So for example, if I type in pat.crysdale@dal.ca, it will tell me that there is no pwnage. If I type in the MSN name I used back in 2006, my stupid super dude type 1, I can see that I was pwned in all kinds of things over the years. That email address shows up in Have I Been Pwned? And what I would do there as an attacker is I'd go over to the dark web and I would use Bitcoin to buy whatever breach it was. And then from there, I can see whatever associated data. Yeah, Troy Hunt does make a lot of stuff on there.
In Frontier, most of associated data.
Sorry, what? Okay. So then I would just go in the dark web, I'd buy whatever breach it was, and then I could see what passwords were there. Now, if you use the same password for everything, that data breach could make you vulnerable because every account has different usernames and passwords and policies. So if I get your Hotmail account password and that password has been changed, that doesn't necessarily mean you've changed it at your bank. It doesn't mean you've changed it at Facebook. It doesn't mean you've changed it anywhere else. And so I can try that password repeatedly. Now with a password manager, this approach just isn't going to work because it's a single password for every site. And they don't have my password that gets used everywhere. The problem is if my master password is compromised or my host machine is compromised, I lose all access. Now I did, one of the guys in my lab when I was researching at Dal, he did his thesis on the security of password managers, and I can't remember for sure, but I think he concluded that they were actually quite safe and the better option. Does that answer the question on password managers? Cool. All right, so then we can start talking about biometrics, because what soon starts to happen is people say, well, why do we even need? Could you use 2 to 3 password managers instead of 1? You absolutely could. That would just be not putting all your eggs in the same basket, but then again, you have to pay for 2 to 3 different services. Like for example, I use 1Password, and I think it costs me like $4 a month or something like that. It's very small. It might only be $2 a month, but they maintain everything. 1Password is actually, I respect them a lot as a security company. On BugCrowd, the site that you guys have all made profiles for Lab Zero, that's sort of a marketplace for white hat hacking. They have a $100,000 bounty for people who can crack their web-based system, and no one has ever claimed it. So I respect them a lot when it comes to keeping things safe. Okay, Mordac, the preventer of information services, and I bring you my newest biometric scanner. Instead of using a password, I put this on your head and squeeze until you scream in a way that only you can scream. No, that's not you, yeah. So we always start talking about biometrics, but then we end up with issues of replicability, and just because one place is willing to accept biometrics doesn't mean another will. It's going to be pretty hard to phase out passwords because of how culturally ubiquitous they are throughout the world. And then we end up starting building privacy concerns where we get, okay, we know this guy's email, we also know his fingerprints, we know the DNA from saliva, we know the retina scan. Like, it gets into really dangerous territory of identity theft at that point, because not only can they replicate your digital presence, they can start replicating your biometric presence. All right, so now we're back with Mordac, the preventer of information services. Security is more important than usability. In a perfect world, no one would be able to do anything. To complete the login procedure, stare directly at the sun. So there's a really famous quote, and I can never remember the name of the guy who said it, that the only computer in the world that's safe is turned off, dismantled, stored in a locked box in a locked room with biometric scanners, passwords, guards, military protection, and even then I'm not sure. I can't remember the name of what do I think of a keyboard stroke pattern as a password? I've used those before. Really, I think, so for example, I've used passwords like this before that are stroke patterns that would take 64 years. But the more complicated you get, like every time your password gets longer, it goes up tremendously, right? So the password strength is really more about memorability and length. So if I type in something like have a nice day, it would take 4 billion years to crack a password that says have a nice day. If I add an exclamation mark, it goes up to 7 trillion, right? So it's really more about the length and the complexity. So if I take a password like, oops, if I take a password that's just keyboard spam, how long would it take to crack this? 4,000 years. but have a nice day, 7 trillion. So it's much more about the complexity than it is about what characters you use. All right, so here's the thing. We set up these barriers to keep bad people out. And in my opinion, perfect security, you don't notice unless you are trying to be somewhere you shouldn't. So security should be unnoticed if you're where you like to be. But unfortunately, we can't have that. So a lot of the time we spend with security, I tend to think of as proving to the machine or the system that we are somewhere that we're actually supposed to be. So you think about the classic example of you install a home alarm system and you spend more time fighting with it and deactivating it and reporting false alarms than you ever do using it to catch bad guys. Like a security alarm will probably be used for its intended purpose once or twice in the entire device's lifespan at best. How many times will it be used as its unintended purpose? Thousands. Like you'll always have people that are afraid of it. You'll always have people that are using it wrong, or you'll always get those false calls that something fell and they think it's glass shattering. So we always try to come around these things. We're always trying to overcome these barriers to the point where there isn't security at all. So we have to find ways to make the human, particularly the user, not want to overcome the security we design. Because we always think of the human as the greatest weakness to security when we think of, oh, they're going to make mistakes, oh, they're going to write things down. But it's really when they try to get around the security practices intended to protect them that they create the greatest vulnerability landscape. Does that make sense to everyone? Where did the chat go? There it is. I will use quantum computer to get password in a few minutes. I had that same idea 2 years ago. Quantum computers can only handle 58 bits equivalently so far. They're not ready for password cracking yet, but in theory, they can destroy the toughest algorithms we know of in matters of minutes. Okay, so I just told you guys about this. So this is the classic gibberish password. Takes all this time, hard to remember. Computer can guess it easily. 4 random words, super hard for the computer to guess, and we remember it easily. I have this bad habit of not advancing the slides with my ideas and I repeat myself. Humans are incapable of securely storing high-quality cryptographic keys, and they have unacceptable speed and accuracy when performing cryptographic operations. They are also large, expensive, difficult to maintain, and they pollute the environment. It is astonishing that these devices continue to be manufactured and deployed, but they are sufficiently pervasive that we must design our protocols around them. C. Hoffman, Perlman, and Spessner in the Network Security Conference. So we are things that defy logic. We are things that can't do heavy amounts of processing, and the computers have to protect us from ourselves. And it is our job as people who are designing usable security interfaces to make sure that we don't let the user expose themselves to weakness. So there are approaches that we can use, and these are approaches that you'll actually see in your design classes. So user-centric iterative approach. You see things like doing a user study. We want to see how the user reacts to our security policy. We want to see how long it takes them to figure out what their password is, how long it takes them to create an account. Typically what we do, typically what we do when we're doing a user study is we look at getting our users to navigate the flow of the app from the beginning goal to the end goal. And that's why we have apps. People need to do things. Every app does something that somebody needs to do. But oftentimes we do, when we're doing user tests, is we be budget conscious and we don't get users to check things that are more for security. We don't get users to check things that are meta for the app, like creating an account. We just want to see the flows of them from start to finish, assuming they've made the account. You want to test everything in your app, especially the security. If they can't figure out how to make a password, or if they can't figure out how to create an account, they're going to start password sharing. They're going to start they're going to start going somewhere else. They're going to do anything but do the thing that you anticipated them to do, unless you've tested and figured out that most people will do it intuitively. So when you're looking at UI UX in terms of requirements gathering, you always say to the client, well, what is it that we're trying to accomplish? What does it need to do? What are the features? What are our goals? Don't forget to ask about the sensitivity of the data that's going into your website or application. Don't forget to ask about the risk of exposure to data. What is the consequence of the data exposure? So if I'm just creating like a simple app that's just a Pokedex or something that keeps track of all the Pokemon I've caught in Pokemon Go, I don't need to worry so much about the information because it's really just a bunch of checkboxes. No one can steal my bank account information by knowing that I have a Charizard, not a Pikachu. However, if I'm designing a bank application, I need to think about the billions of dollars that are at risk with the security, and I need to make that security a priority feature. And we can't make something secure without making security a priority. But the problem is, if it's too secure, people won't use it and they'll go to a different bank. So for example, I use Scotiabank and BMO I actually find them really annoying with their interfaces. And that's one of the reasons I haven't fully switched over. So Scotiabank on the main page will tell you your available funds. It won't tell you, if you want to see your money on hold, you have to go into a submenu. BMO is quite the opposite. It'll tell you how much money you have in total, including holds. So there's been a couple of times where I've gone to go buy something and my card's declined, and I've been like, no, I'm literally looking at the amount of money I have, and I have way more than enough. Then I find out there's a hold, but I have to go into a submenu to see that, and I actually only have like a quarter available, and I have to use a different card. And these are things that we need to be very mindful of, because if we have, like, that's a security issue that's being dealt with from the bank's perspective. They think it's important for you to know how much money you have available to you, as I would think that too. But they want you to know it in terms of how much money is coming so that you don't get worried when you deposit a check and you see that it's just 25 cents in your account. They don't want their call centers raided. They don't want people calling to complain, but it doesn't bode well for usability. So sometimes when you're making a decision, you might be making a decision in terms of, we don't want 10,000 people calling to complain and overwhelming our call centers, because that would just be like a DDoS attack. But at the same time, you don't want people losing out and changing service providers entirely because they don't like the interface. So go through iterative design, development process. I trust you've all seen that before. Prototype evaluations, design walkthroughs. Heuristic evaluations. These are something that we're going to do in milestone 4 in this class. Heuristic evaluations are when you bring in experts to do usability assessments. And they look for things that the average person won't look for. The average person would just say like, oh, it's really intuitive that this is here. But we actually have notable heuristics that we can use. Get to you in 2 seconds. We actually have notable heuristics we can use, like visibility of system status, the ability to save your progress, the ability to forgive errors, like error handling. These are super important. Like if you fill out a form and the form you filled out somehow wrong, and it makes you fill out the form again, it's not something that's good. But when you fill out the form, make a mistake, and it just tells you what to correct, that's much more intuitive. People will go, hey, it's super user-friendly, it's intuitive, and they won't be able to describe why. But that's just instinct, but we know that that's one of the heuristics to look for. Principle of least privilege. So someone in the chat's asking about that. Principle of least privilege means everyone gets exactly the privileges and credentials they need to do, and not an inch more or less. And principle of least privilege is a fantastic idea in theory, but is something that is very difficult to strive to in practice. Because people's roles, especially in our industry, are constantly changing. And it can be a burden on your accounts department to constantly be updating small privileges and removing them. So we try to keep people as close as we can, but the theoretical perfect idea of principal of least privilege is something much more theoretical than practical. I know this because when I was at Defense one summer, I was working in Active Directory, and it was my job to migrate accounts going from different departments, and we had to strip them of their privileges. And people will create these privileges in Windows, and then they will forget something, so then they end up creating a second set of privileges to fix that, but that doesn't make it to the documentation. So then we end up giving people tons of privileges that don't make any conceivable sense, and only people who've been there a long time know that you have to have all these privileges together, and that becomes hard. And a lot of the time, to avoid that, what they do is say, instead of here's the privileges we want, they say, hey, this other guy has everything you need. Let's just copy his privileges exactly. But he could be on some committee, he could be at a higher security clearance, and different things could be copied, and that's always dangerous. So that's typically mitigated by keeping everything in the same clearance level in the same servers, so that there's other barriers. But you can see with that logic how quickly principal least privilege can be affected. All right, so we can define usability in terms of fruit. We'll look at tasty and untasty, and then easy and difficult. So seedless grapes are both tasty and easy to eat. Peaches are also tasty and easy. Pineapples are tasty, but much more difficult to eat. They're much less usable. You can't just go to the store, buy a pineapple, and crunch into it the way you can an apple or a peach. You actually have to take the time to eat it properly. Untasty and difficult, untasty, but moderately easy to eat are lemons. You could easily cut up a lemon and put it in your mouth, but it's gonna hurt the old mouth. Grapefruit, untasty and difficult, hard to get in there. When you do, you don't get much reward for it. So we can think of the same thing, but in terms of security and usability. So we can, oranges, looks like they're, whoever made, this is slightly subjective. And by slightly, I mean completely. I didn't make this graph for the record. And we can do the same thing with security and usability. So things that are usable are often things that aren't secure. And the goal is to get as close to the two being balanced as possible, depending on your risk assessment. All right, we got more Dilbert. We've narrowed our target market to this guy. He's the only one rich enough and stupid enough to buy our high-end product. Our diamond encrusted time machine will make you 1 hour, will take you exactly 1 hour into the future in just 60 minutes. So what we need to do is understand the user's needs. So someone like me, if you're marketing an application, I like to see I look for two-factor authentication. I look for those things. And those are things that will make me more likely to be a customer. But there's a lot of people that just see 2FA as something that's annoying, and they deliberately avoid it by either disabling it or choosing alternate services. And you have to keep in mind that not everything needs to be as secure as everything else. Not everything needs to be secure. So like, if I've got my hard drive, my external hard drive that has all my banking and tax records, I want that thing encrypted up the wazoo, but do I need the same hard drive that I just used to boot Ubuntu to be as encrypted? No, we don't need to do that. And you have to understand the user's needs for security as well as the business's needs. Typically speaking, the business has a higher security need than the user. Someone's got their microphone on. Can you turn it off?
Well,
unless you're trying to ask me something. I'm just gonna mute everyone.
Okay, can I tell you?
Yep. Someone have a question? I think I just muted everyone accidentally. So if someone had a question, they can go for it. Okay. Okay, anyway, where was I? Some people will choose not to use 2FA, so you have to know what your users are. Business needs for security are often higher than users' needs, because if, like, I'm a PhD student, I'm not worth that much money right now. Like, if my whole identity was stolen. Worst case scenario for me, to a business would just be like nothing. Like my dad went to Trent University and he got a letter from the alumni service fairly recently that said the alumni database was subject to a ransomware attack, and the ransom people asked for like way more than I'm worth, like $60,000 or something like that, and they just paid it. They didn't even care. They just paid it. They got the data unleashed. Then they took it all offline, archived it, and said, "Okay, now we're safe. This never happens again." A $60,000 bill to me, not a chance. To a business like a university, who cares? So the business, like for Trent to want to not pay it and try other things, would be in the millions and millions of dollars. Like Dal, even more so. Like I think it happened to Carleton at one point too. They asked for like $22,000, and Carleton was like, "Oh, is that all you want? Hey, what are you gonna say so? Here you go." But for someone like a student, that could be debilitating. So you can imagine how if every single person in the database, let's say, is worth $22,000, we've got how many students at Dal? 20,000. It's like 20,000 times, actually just square it, like $400 million. Like if everyone's life is compromised, like everyone's data is compromised, Dal would stand to lose $400 million easily. That's purely theoretically, of course. So you're saying target business, target single person for less hassle. I'm saying business needs for security are different. So if the way the dark web is going about things right now, they figure that if they that they can get more money from, how do I put it? So if you steal the identity of a single person, you're hoping to get access to their life savings. You're hoping to get enough to get yourself out of crippling debt, whatever it is. And they don't always get that when they get a single person, because if they just hack like a random person, they might only get like $200. But if they attack a large business and ask for less money than it would cost to get, like, if a business was asked for $1 billion to decrypt the ransomware, they would get every computer science student in the country to come in for $1 million and find a way to crack it, and it would be cheaper to find a way to crack it. But if they ask for $20,000, there is no way that anyone is going to come in and try to crack it for even close to that amount of money. It's going to cost more to get someone to come in, especially in terms of like if they asked me to come in and do it, I wouldn't charge $20,000, but the electricity to run the Bitcoin miners that I would need, the hardware I would need to procure, those two things alone would be more than $20,000. So it's when businesses are attacked, what the dark web has been doing is asking for less money than it costs to get fixed. And that's getting them more money than if they attack an individual. Does that answer your question? Like it's purely theoretical, but I'm just saying, like, if they ask for, if everyone's identity is worth, let's say, roughly 20,000 on average, if we go to the law of averages and there's 20,000 people at Dal, that data is going to be worth a lot more than an individual. So to just pay off the cost of bringing in the hardware and electricity to get it fixed, then they can get their IT guys to archive the data so it doesn't happen again. It's just easier for them. Does that answer everyone's question? That's only like half of their tuition anyway. That's my other point in how I came up with that 20,000 is, you guys are undergrads. If you're domestic, you pay probably about $10,000 in tuition a year. If you're international, I know it's like twice that. Then we think about faculty and staff that have got research grants and everything else. Most professors have at least that much money in grant funding. So if all that's locked out, it's pretty intense. All right, let's skip this. So what I've been talking about so far is that most security breaches are attributed to human error. One of the most, if ever you guys go to DEF CON or anything like that, I've never been personally, but I really want to go at some point. They have these booths for social engineering, and it'll literally just be like a dude like me in a hoodie, and they'll say they can hack you. And all you have to do is tell them a couple of bits of info about yourself, and they will be able to do something. So one example was this one time someone came and said, I want you to hack, one of the CBC reporters went to them and said, I want you to hack me and see what you can do. And they said, great, do you have, what's your name? Do you have Bella Rogers? And he was like, I have Rogers. And this person she was a woman, and she opened up YouTube and typed in the sound of a crying baby and put it on full blast, and then called up Rogers and said, hey, I'm this person. My husband's going to be home any minute. And I said I would get this done, but it's so complicated. I need the password changed. I just can't get in. And on the other end, they were like, sure, ma'am, we'd be happy to help you. And they changed, and she added herself as like an authorized person, and she was able to like change his plan and like 5 other things, all from creating a sense of urgency and tricking the person on the other end into thinking they're helping. And they on the other end have no way of knowing who they're actually talking to. They can just make a best guess with security questions. If any of you have ever been in a 2201 class that I've taught, you've probably seen that video at some point. If you haven't, I highly recommend you check out CBC Marketplace. They do a lot of videos that relate to security lately, and to people like us, they're specifically interesting because we can understand deeper what's going on, but it's also kind of shocking to see how much people don't understand. Like they did one as well on installing cameras, like wireless cameras for security monitoring, and the people who set them up just go, hey, video feed's good. And they started going to people's houses and saying, hey, we hacked your camera and we figured out from social engineering where exactly you are, and we know you have this many kids, and we know you do this because we've been watching your camera. And I remember the look on their face when they were like, we put a camera on the internet and we never thought this would happen. And it's like, they didn't encrypt it. It was available over like HTTP. They had no password, no nothing. And all of the things they had installed offered these features, but they didn't even bother to think about them. All right, so now let's talk about the other way. Humans can also be very good at coming up with ways to get around things, especially when there's money involved. So like we just talked about, if it's cheaper to pay you than it is to get someone to fix it, they'll probably pay you. Humans are very good at coming up with things out of urgency. So if it's your job to hack somewhere and someone's paying you to do it, or there's a big payload, I guarantee you'll think of a way. Like there's this one time I was at a job interview and I had to do a test, and I hate doing tests for job interviews because they don't encapsulate what they think they're doing. And one of these questions was, pick a target and say how you would attack them. And in that moment, when I read that question, I had no idea how I would do that. And it took me all of 30 seconds to come up with a plan to attack St. Mary's University. So here's the plan I came up with, and this was entirely out of necessity to do well on this job interview, was I would go on LinkedIn and I would try to see what grad students and IT people are advertising their skills on LinkedIn. Because the fantastic thing about LinkedIn is when people are bragging about their skills and they say all the little things they're doing, one of the things they're secretly revealing is what credentials they have, what access they have, and what privileges they have to what systems. And so I said, okay, well, let's go look at grad students that have this access. So what we want is a grad student that has access to the St. Mary's website. Because the way Dal works is we often give people access to parts of the website so they can update and maintain program specifications or news or that kind of thing. So my goal was to change the banner on St. Mary's to say something like Dal rules. And so I said, okay, we'll find some grad student that has this access. And then we'll send them an email saying that they've won a scholarship for funding. And in the email, we'll put a phishing link. All they have to do is make an account with their St. Mary's credentials and username and password, and the scholarship will be added to their account. So I said I would do this. And then what would happen from there is you have the credentials, you can test to see what's used, and then you can see who else has access. And you repeat this until you find someone who has access to edit the banner, and there you go. I had never thought of this plan before. I had never even thought about hacking anyone before I took this test. But I was sitting there out of necessity going, okay, I got to do something. What do I know about computers and what do I know about people? And then it all came together. And that's the interesting thing about hacking is a lot of people say, I don't know how to do this. And then I go, well, wait a minute, you know how to program, you know how computers work, you know where things are in the operating system, and presumably you know how to trick people. That's all you need to know. And that's pretty much all of social engineering. All right. Have I done this already? All right. Has anyone ever gone out to buy a computer just for the purpose of securing it? I haven't. Have any of you ever just decided, I'm going to go to Best Buy and I'm going to get a nice big fancy computer and I'm going to do nothing more with it than encrypt it, lock it down from the network, and make sure that it stays safe? No, you don't do that. You don't buy a computer to secure it. You buy a computer because you need to do things and you need to be able to use it. So we're always making these trade-offs. Wouldn't tell you if I had. Well, fair enough, I guess. The time we spend configuring privacy tools is time we are not spending doing what we really want to be doing with our computers. So yes, I enjoy securing my computer. Yes, I enjoy using VPNs, but there's always an end goal. For example, with me in a VPN, it is so I can watch Hulu because Hulu is way better than Netflix and Crave and has much better content. But I am always in a cat and mouse war with Hulu. So I have friends in the States and we traded credentials. I let them on my Disney Plus, they let me on their Hulu. And every once in a while, Hulu will say that they've detected me using a VPN and I have to change my strategy. So lately, the cat and mouse war has been, they detect me, I change the state that the VPN I'm using is. So I'm usually trying to be in New York because that's the closest to Ontario, but I might switch to New Jersey, somewhere far away enough that their computers will say, oh, okay, he's not using a VPN anymore, he's back where he's supposed to be. Then that stopped working. And I started to look why it wasn't working. And I found out that the browser will actually leak to the website you're using your relative GPS coordinates within just enough distance that they couldn't really find you, just know what part of town you're in. So my computer was telling Hulu I'm in New York, but it was telling the IP address was saying New York, but my computer was saying downtown Ottawa. And so what I've had to do is use Google Maps to find coordinates of places in New York and then put them into the browser so that Hulu thinks I'm where I claim to be. And this is fun, and I like this cat and mouse game, but there's always an end goal. I want to keep watching shows on Hulu. I don't want to just appear to be in New York for the hell of it. And there's a goal, right? So we always have to have that goal. And Hulu is, they keep getting wise, and I keep having to adapt my strategy. So I keep having to up my offense as they up their defense. It's an endless cat and mouse game. When you guys were in high school, I'm sure the computers you used all had firewalls on them. Mine definitely did, and we were always one step ahead of the administration. They blocked everything, so we started using a proxy, and they blocked sites that offered proxies, so we started bringing them in on USBs. Then they started like looking for. One of the things they did that I actually thought was pretty ingenious was they figured out the exact bytes, like down to the exact bit size of the tool that we were using. It was called UltraSurf, and they just always scanned for files that were that exact bit size and deleted it if there was anything. And the odds of anything else being similar were astronomically none. I never heard of anyone having their thing do that, but we figured this out. So all we did was just append, we just appended an extra bit at the end of it, and then they couldn't find it. So then they changed their whole network configuration so that the out point had to be from them, and you couldn't access with a proxy. So then we figured, then at that point, iPhones had just came out. We started using our own mobile network, so we didn't care anymore. But it was always this endless battle. And there was like me and 5 other nerds that were just like the computer kids. And every time someone was like, they found it, we were just like, great, we're not going to do any work for 2 weeks until we figure this out. And it's just that endless cat and mouse game. But we wouldn't put in that work if there wasn't a goal. Like, hackers don't hack just for the sake of it. We don't secure things just for the sake of it. Okay, so the grand challenge of security is give end users security controls they can understand and privacy they can control for the dynamic, pervasive computing environments of the future. So one of the reasons I don't have a Facebook account is they do the exact opposite of this. So what Facebook used to do, whenever they would change their policies, they always had somewhere in their EULA, their end user license agreement, which are legally binding, by the way, they always had something that said, when you accept this, which you must accept to continue, your privacy settings are put back to what we want them to be, not where we legally require, not where you have chosen them to be based on our legal restrictions that we have to give you. And that's something that always bothered me. And it is against the core goal of privacy, which is let people decide what they want to disclose. So some people are willing to tell you anything you want to know, even if you didn't ask. Like, there are some people who will just randomly in conversation tell you what medications their doctor has given them and why, and then they'll talk to you about like problems they had in 3rd grade, and they'll go on to say like they read some book recently, and you'll just be sitting there going, is there anything you keep to yourself? And if there is, I don't want to know. Then there are other people who, if you ask them their last name or their birthday, they'll say, sorry, bro, you're not getting anything more than that. I actually know a guy who's very much like that. And I scared him one time by showing him that the absence of information is just as revealing as information. Just build a different profile. And he was like completely freaked out. And it actually made him genuinely uncomfortable to think that he could be tracked that way. And he's always making the choice to find apps that work for his goals of privacy. And his general argument is just that privacy needs to be a feature, not just some policy associated with the business. And so he's always choosing apps to make privacy and security features and not just infrastructure. Does everyone understand what I mean by the difference between privacy as infrastructure and privacy as a feature? As infrastructure, it is just, there are things we can't control about the internet. It runs over HTTP, it runs over IP networks. We don't change those things, and no app is going to change those things. And there's some amount of security that comes from that infrastructure. But when you make it a feature, it's when security becomes a prioritized goal of the app developers, and it's something that's sold as part of it. So like there's an app called Signal that can delete messages after 60 seconds, and it's got end-to-end encryption. And their whole business is just going, we're not associated with Facebook. We don't want to track your data. We're end-to-end encrypted, and you can have messages auto-delete so that they're actually deleted too. And that becomes a feature. And it's not just like Snapchat, where you know that Snapchat's happening securely over SSL, so it can't be snooped. But Snapchat has never been one to be known for being associated with security. Next thing we get into is privacy fatigue. So one thing about humans is we can't really handle all these crises at the same time. There's always a crisis in the world. Right now, we're living in unprecedented times of every day. Like the news lately, I think has just been saying all breaking news. Like every time my mom has the news on the TV, it always says breaking news. Like there's just so much to keep up with. And we've got a climate crisis, we've got a pandemic, we've got hackers that are going after US democracy. We've got all this stuff going on. Why do we have to also care about 2-factor authentication, and then we have to wear a mask every day, and we have to do this, and you know, like, when does it stop? Like at some point I just want to stop. And that's one of the problems with security, is if you put too much effort into the wrong place, it tends to backfire. So we don't want to spend time securing things that don't need to be secured. Creepiness is actually one of the most interesting things to me psychologically in terms of computers, because it's a perfect example of discussing what privileges people face in their day-to-day. So if you were to ask me what my biggest concern is with my data leaking, I would probably say I don't want to face whatever wrath the Research Ethics Board has for me if identifiable research data breaks out. And I definitely don't want to be the guy who's doing a PhD in cybersecurity that gets hacked. Those would be my two biggest concerns. Neither are associated with creepiness. I have many female friends that don't have either of those concerns. Their biggest concern is people stalking them and trying to hack for intimate photos or anything like that. And there is research backing up that depending on what things you are afraid of in real life or what things that are a genuine concern to you in real life, those are the things you'll also be concerned about when faced in a digital environment. So we look at creepiness in the sense of there's an emotional guard around your information. And the more that is penetrated, the more risk of discomfort you have with your privacy being breached. And because of the way our society has been formed, different groups of people in different demographics are used to sharing more intimate data than others. And that creates bigger risks for senses of creepiness. And so that's one thing we have to mitigate is what is our app going to be sharing? So things like Snapchat, it's well documented that Snapchat is used for sexual and dating purposes just as much as it is for chatting. So they, when they're having their discussions about security, they have to be thinking about the fact that there are people sharing truly intimate things. And that is much more dangerous than someone who is just sharing a funny joke over email. That is much more dangerous than, guess what Pokemon I just caught, want to trade Pokemon, that kind of thing. And so we have to think about that very seriously because that creepiness factor can completely change a person's attitude towards an app before it even comes into play. So for example, when looking to download an app, people are now more and more thinking about what am I going to use that for and how secure is that going to be in terms of my trust level. So that's when you get an app like Signal that says, we are end-to-end security, we delete your stuff right away, and that makes people feel more comfortable that their privacy is going to be reached, not as much. Now the privacy paradox is we want privacy, but we want the benefits that come from sharing. So this goes back to my original theory of I would love for cybersecurity to be that I never feel it, I never notice it, it never interacts with me unless I'm actually trying to go somewhere I don't need to be. I would love it if it kept the bad guys out and I didn't even notice it while it was doing that. But we can't have that. And it's the same issue with privacy. And it all becomes with who do you trust? Because if truly, let's say there's an app that we can share anything we want with the other person, there's relationships in there we can't control. So let's say this app is truly unbreachable. It is a magic app that's been forged by the fires of whatever that is much more powerful than anything we know how to create. It connects two people and there's no way that can be breached. There's still the implicit trust between the two humans. What if that relationship changes? We have chosen to trust somebody else with our information, and they now have a platform for violating our trust that has nothing to do with the security of the app. So we want all that privacy, but when we get it, what do we do with it? We use it to share with the people that we want to share with, and they can still turn around and hurt us. And that becomes the great paradox that we don't know how to solve is if things are truly secure, how do we keep the privacy with the humans? And there are laws being written right now that are talking about what can be shared and what can't be shared and what you have to have consent to share. But that's the key thing to think about is when you get that maximum privacy, all you're doing is changing your concern about privacy from worried about the app to, okay, now the other person has whatever I sent them. What are they going to do with it? Can I trust them? That's entirely up to you, but that's just the dynamic we get. But in the meantime, we trust technology less than we trust humans, so we're just worried about what's going to happen over the app. I mean, at this point, as long as there is more than one person, there will never be 100% security. 100% security actually doesn't exist. Never has. It just has to cost more it has to cost more money to break into something than the thing you're stealing is worth. So if it costs me $50,000 to get Bitcoin miners to crack your password, and that will gain me $2 million if I do it, only time can save you at that point. If I have to spend $50,000 to get Bitcoin crackers and you only have $5, you are actually pretty secure because it is not worth any of our time to go and crack that. So security is also in not letting people know what you have, because the more they know what you have, the more valuable your assets become, and therefore the more worthwhile it becomes to invest into cracking you. Hacking is an investment of time, skill, and hardware. And if you have those three things and they cost less than the thing you're hacking, that's, as far as business is concerned, a perfectly valid business model. From ethics, terrible. But from business, it's we put in money, time, and skill, and we can get more money as a result. Let's do it. How does that compare to less info can still give info? So the problem with, if you're talking about my friend from earlier, who I told him no info, like you can tell just as much from a black hole that you can from anything else. If you can detect a presence using an application and they're always obfuscating their access, but there's one unifying thing together, and all you have is this one unifying thing. Let's say it's a browser identification that can connect all of these things together. And no matter how well you're obfuscating your data, as long as one thing that connects you together, we go, this is just, we go and categorize data. So we can go, hey, this guy is a nerd who's got Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh cards on his wall. We're going to sell him more of those. We're going to give those ads. This guy who we know nothing about but can still identify him with his browser data, this is a tinfoil hat guy, for example. We are going to send him ads that are only related to privacy and security to make him feel more safe online. Like what we're doing when we're identifying that data, especially tracking you across multiple sites, is knowing what what ads to target to you. So if you're consistently blocking all your information and there's one way to identify you, you're going to get that. If you somehow find a way not to be tracked across all of those things, you're still going to get ads. And those ads may not be as well targeted to you, but they still are trying to sell you something. So the goal with privacy is to stop them from taking who you are, getting to know you too well, and then getting that creepiness that they're inside your head and going, did they hear my conversation the other day? Like, how do they know I wanted that? And so our goal with privacy is to stop that from happening. Some people will say, I don't want to hear anything from them at all. Like personally, I hate advertisements. Okay, so side note, my uncle, he writes commercials. And I have a master's of electronic commerce. And he is almost 60. Every opinion we have on business is completely opposite. So for example, every Thanksgiving and Christmas, it's only a matter of time before him and I get into it. He will say that commercials are the only viable way to monetize entertainment media. And I will always argue back with, no, subscription-based models are the only way to do that. And the one thing both of our models have in common is that we both acknowledge that someone has to pay for it. And that someone having to pay for it can come through advertising, it can come through wherever. But to get that target person, we have to identify them and give them whatever that target is, give them that advertisement. And where are they going with this? We're talking about advertising. So I hate advertising, and targeted ads annoy me. Any form of advertising annoys me because I hate anything that interrupts the experience. I'm more than willing to pay to play if I'm promised the experience won't be interrupted. So that becomes a privacy and security thing, because I don't want my nice experience when I'm relaxing to be interrupted with that creepy sense. I don't want to be really interested in what's going to happen next and have to see a video I've already seen. His argument is entirely different. He wants not to pay for it. He wants to have the commercial so he can know when to go pee, and he writes commercials, so of course he's going to say that. Oh, that's actually, you bring up a really good point there. So you said that sometimes seeing an ad for long enough makes you less inclined to buy said product. I used that argument on my uncle once, and he showed me actual research data that proves that people think that while doing the opposite behavior. So I knew a guy once who said, I hate Duracell batteries. I saw an ad for Duracell batteries once, and now I'm never going to buy Duracell batteries. And I was like, dude, you just said Duracell batteries 3 times, and now we're both thinking about Duracell batteries. That ad obviously worked. And there are focus groups being done all the time in marketing that say the more you hate an ad, the more invasive and creepy it is, the more you think about it, and the more likely you actually are to buy the product despite thinking otherwise. And this goes back into the creepiness factor of privacy. I personally think of advertising as a form of mental coercion that tricks you into playing the game of capitalism. And I would much rather spend my hard-earned money on a subscription-based model that lets me go to a place I can relax, knowing I've paid for it, that won't interrupt me from more. And the counter argument that a lot of people make there is, oh, you see product placement, you see people talking, like you'll see like a Subway sandwich be built into the storyline. And I go, well, yeah, but a Subway sandwich is also built into the storyline of my life. I don't actually mind that. Like there's gonna be advertising, but I like the non-invasive kind. Like I go to McDonald's fairly regularly and I tell people that might be a form of advertising, but I enjoy the experience, I enjoy the food, and it's just part of my routine. If that's in the show, who cares? That's like, I relate to that. But if it's something good's about to happen, full stop, buy some shampoo. I know times are tough right now with the pandemic, buy a Corolla, like, and then you go back to the show, it just ruins it. So that's part of the creepiness factor for me, is it gets into my head. Okay. So, well, we got way off topic. Sorry about that, guys. So we're cutting through the fatigue. So the fatigue of advertising, the fatigue of privacy violation, the fatigue of everything must be secured. We have to make people aware of the consequences. So if it's a banking application, if it's something where intimate photos are going to be shared, if it's something where your credentials are used for work-based purposes, it is entirely something that should be prioritized and should be made known to your users that this can happen. None of us are safe from it. Take a look. But if it's just a dinky little app, you don't need to put as much security. People are only willing to invest as much time as is proportional to the risk. You can make decisions yourself, like in your database, you can do extra rounds of hashing, extra rounds of encryption, all that kind of stuff that doesn't affect the user's progress, and make sure that if there's a data breach, things are still safe. So what I've seen on the dark web is sometimes you get a result set that is entirely hashed, and then somebody else will say, hey, I'll go hash it for you, but you have to give me some Bitcoin. And then that becomes a secondary marketplace. But in that amount of time, passwords may have expired, people may have changed their passwords, the company can become aware of the breach. So hashing your databases, for example, buys you time so you don't have to get the users to do more work. And then in that amount of time, you can tell people, hey, there was a breach, your data probably is okay, but you should change it just in case. Simple decisions. So we want to make yes or no. We don't want to say, hey, do you want to use RSA or SHA-256, or do you want to use AES? Those are all 3 very different kinds of encryption with very different kinds of keys and very different processes and usefulnesses. Even I would have to sit and think about which one I'd want to use given the different purpose. So how can we expect a user to do the same thing? I don't know why you guys don't just use AdBlock. There are literally plugins built into all the browsers that look for ad servers, then block them. Okay, so we look at threat models. So whenever you build an application, this is one of the things you'll be doing in milestone 2, is building a threat model to your design. So one thing I'll always say to you is never, ever, ever, is it legal to not disclose that there has been a breach in your company? I don't know the answer to that with 100% certainty, but I know who would, and I might ask him. Yeah, it probably is legal though to not disclose that. So we got some people talking in the chat. I use something called AdBlock Plus for Chrome and for Firefox, and it just blocks its goal is to make the internet a place for ads that are not intrusive. So it won't block ads that are in the side, or won't block like ads suggested in Google. But what it will do is block things like ads on videos, pop-ups, that kind of thing. And I personally find it makes the internet a much better place. People are also talking about a thing called Pi-hole, which is where you take a Raspberry Pi and reroute all your DNS traffic to the Pi. And what that'll do is every time any website requests any ad server, it gets redirected to the Pi rather than to the ad server, and the Pi doesn't send an ad back. The problem is with that is that some sites are so dependent on ads and the way they're programmed that it can break sites. So for Firefox, Firefox to me is the most privacy conscious browser, and it's got several modes of restriction. And its most intense restriction, they say you can use this, but be careful, it will break sites. And it breaks sites a lot for me. So I tend to fiddle with my settings a lot. The problem with Pi-hole is once you have a Raspberry Pi somewhere on your network, you have to SSH into it every time you want to fix anything, and that can always be a pain. Okay, so threat models, we talked about these. So when you're making a threat model, what you do is you look at all the ways you can be attacked and what are things for. So if you're hosting an email server, you're not really going to be too concerned if there's money be exchanged over email, because you're not dealing with that. Your concern is that the content of emails will be released and that will affect people's privacy. If you're running a bank, your threat model is the money. People can steal the money. You've got to look at every app exists to allow someone to interact with a commodity or do a task. And you got to make sure that there are anyone who can come in with responsible knowledge can either disrupt that commodity or disrupt that task. And you want to write those down to make sure that when you're doing your plan and your design, that any form of obstruction to the app's goals or violations of privacy have been addressed in the design plan. All right, so we can start talking about some attacks on passwords. I told you guys already about Keylogger. Keylogger is the program on your computer that records every single keystroke and sends it somewhere else. They are incredibly powerful. They are harder now than before to install on a remote host. It's not impossible. I know how to do it. It's just you'd have to trick the person into either installing something or putting a USB into their computer, which is harder to do these days unless you're attacking someone who's older. Okay, so we're going to talk about how other ways passwords can be compromised. So in any time the data transfers over a network, as you guys know, it goes through many phases. So the first thing is shoulder surfing. So if I go type in a password and someone can see my fingers on the keyboard, that is a problem. So that's threat number one. Threat number two is assuming the integrity of the network. So when I send a password, even over HTTPS, even over VPN, even over every possible thing you can think of, the browser takes the little text in the password box and sends it unencrypted in the request to the site. And then that request with your unencrypted password is secured. And it doesn't matter if you hash it, doesn't matter if you secure it, whatever, because when the thing when it's received on the other side, that's automatically what it's going to work with. So if you take your password and you hash it a billion times, it doesn't matter if I intercept that or not, because once I do have it, I'm just going to send that over and see if the website you're trying to authenticate to is just taking that as the password. It doesn't matter. So that's called a man-in-the-middle attack. So if I compromise, okay, sure. Let's say I have a password for a site, and it's my Facebook password. And I type in my username and password, and I click login. What's happening in the browser is it takes the form of the username and the password, and it makes a packet. And in that packet, there is the source IP and destination IP address. The source IP address is mine, the destination IP address is Facebook's. And in the payload, it says all the data that I am sending to Facebook in plain text. And that includes my username and my password. If this data is sent over HTTPS, that is encrypted. If it is not sent over HTTPS, it is unencrypted data. When it arrives on the other end, Facebook takes the username and password and sees if they're a match. And if it is, they return a signal saying authenticated. If not, they say not authenticated. Now, if I install software in strategic places that I will show you how to do this semester, I can intercept requests between a browser and a server. And even if they're over HTTPS, if I have them in the right place, I can see what's in the packet. And in the packet, I can then get the username and password. And you might say, well then Pat, why don't you just like encrypt it in the payload too? However it is sent is exactly how the server expects to receive it. So if I encrypt it, the server is going to expect it encrypted, and they will do the unencryption for me. So it doesn't matter if it's encrypted or not. We have to encrypt the packet payload itself. So if I put myself in any strategic point between you and the server, that is called a man-in-the-middle attack. If I find your password by intercepting it between the browser and the server, that is a sniffing or phishing attack, depending on what point I find it. So sniffing means that I control a router or something in between source and destination, or I have some node that listens on the network. And if you broadcasted your password unencrypted, I can easily read whatever's been transmitted, and then I can look to seeing if it's valid credentials I can use somewhere else. If I work for Facebook and I've decided to go rogue and I want to hack into your account, I might actually have access through the company and my professional contacts that allow me to do that through either my sysadmin privileges or knowing someone that could do it, and that bypasses security policies that would exist to protect from the outside. So those are just some of the ways that a password can be attacked. Does anyone have any questions about that? No? Okay. So I will teach you how to do all or most of these attacks. They won't be till later in the term, and a lot of the time when you say, when I teach you something, I'm going to say, here's the technical way to do it, but odds are you can probably get the password another way. I had a prof back when I was at Algonquin who was talking about cybersecurity, and it was the first cybersecurity lecture I ever attended. And he said, what's the easiest way to get someone's password? And I said, you could do a phishing scam. And he was like, easier than that. And I was like, someone was in my class before, because I asked them for it. You guys, I definitely have told you that before, that if you say, what's your password? Sometimes people will actually tell you. Like if you're doing tech support for someone and they're saying, hey, I'm having a problem with my computer, and the password prompt comes up, you can say, hey, what's your password? It's asking me for it. In my experience, at least 50% of the time, they'll just say the password out loud like it's not a secret. And then you have their password and it's over. You don't need any of this. Okay. So we look, actually, I want to show you guys something later on. So this is something that came up with in research. This is a safeguard against shoulder surfing. A big sleeve you can put over your computer to type your passwords without other people looking. But in my opinion, it draws more attention to yourself. Go back. So on our next class, I'm going to be showing you guys more about different types of threats and how you can attack them. Most of the time we're saying in the scope of networks, because one of the biggest parts of web-centric computing is the web. However, a lot of the things I'm going to talk about are applicable in most environments. Seeing as the web is just a connection of multiple devices, I can show you how to do individual devices. Do we want to leave it here for today? Yeah, I think so. Cool. Does anyone have any questions? I think I'm going to call it for today. Oh, where did you go? Is there a participation thing for today? That is a good question. We probably need one. Does anyone have any ideas for a participation thing we could do? More faster there. Have I been pwned? Go on have I been pwned and see if you've been pwned. We'll call that today's participation exercise. Cool. Any other questions from today? Yeah, and
yeah, so we just have to put a screenshot?
Yeah, basically if ever I ask you to do anything, it's a screenshot. Participation marks, I can't, it's either that or going to be less than a paragraph of writing. Any other questions? There's at least one person who wanted to meet with me after. They can send me an email. Am I wanting the screenshot as a PDF? If it's a single file submission, I'll take it as any file format, but if it's multiple files, it must be PDF. So man in the middle is interception between the user and browser. Okay, we just, so man in the middle. Okay. So man in the middle is interception between the user and browser, and sniffing is between the browser and server. That is correct. Oops. Stop share. All right, stop recording. How do I do that again?